Let's start things off by opening this image right here. It's called picturepuzzlehi.jpg, and it's inside the Lesson 4 folder, which is inside the Part 1 folder, which is inside the Project Files folder that you installed from this DVD series to your hard drive. And this happens to be a scan of a piece of line art that I drew years and years ago, almost 20 years ago now, back when I was a lad doing illustration for, in this case, a local restaurant, actually. And this is a little picture puzzle cartoon that spells out this long, elaborate quote. Pretty famous quote from Samuel Butler, as it turns out. But in any case, this serves as a useful example for learning how to navigate inside Photoshop. Because it's such an enormous scan, such a big, high-resolution scan, we're zoomed way, way out. When we first open up the image, it ends up being zoomed pretty far out. Now, in my case, it opens up at the 8.33% zoom ratio, as we can see inside the title bar here. And 8.33% turns out to be the same as the fraction 1/12. So we're seeing 1/12 of the horizontal pixels inside this image and 1/12 of the vertical pixels inside this image, which means we're only seeing 1 out of every 144 pixels inside this image. So we're seeing just the merest fraction of the detail inside this image. That allows us to take in the entire image in one viewing. However, we can't see the real detail inside the image. And the quality, so far as we're sort of ascertaining it on screen here, really suffers as a result. To zoom into the image and see it in more clarity, less of the image at a time, but more clarity in terms of the details that we do see, you go up to the View menu, and you can choose the Zoom In command, which also has a keyboard shortcut that I recommend you learn, which is Command plus on the Macintosh side or Control plus on the PC. And that'll go ahead and zoom you in. And every time you press Command plus or Control plus, you're going to zoom in that much more. And as it turns out, every other zoom ratio is a good one. Like 25% is good. It's nice and soft on screen. It's smooth on screen. That's called anti-aliasing, for what it's worth. But if I zoom into the 33% zoom ratio, it's kind of jagged, not very representative of the actual transitions of the lines inside the image. Command plus again gets us to 50%. That's a good one. So every other one's a good one. And then the best one is if I zoom in all the way to 100%. So there we are at the 100% zoom ratio. We can see the pixels as they actually exist. Now to zoom out, you press Command minus or Control minus on the PC. And each time you press a keyboard shortcut, you zoom out incrementally. Now, the one thing about the keyboard shortcuts, Command plus, Command minus, is that they center the zoom. So they're always zooming into or out from the center of the image or the center of what you're seeing on screen. What if you want to center something else? Like, what if I want to check out what the heck's going on with these feet down there? Well, I'd have to use the zoom tool. And there is a zoom tool over here in the toolbox, which you can select and then click with the tool on the portion of the image that you want to zoom. But what people do once they get pretty familiar with Photoshop, the easier way to work is just to take advantage of the cross-application Adobe keyboard shortcuts, which are, I'll switch to a different tool just so that we can see them, which are Command spacebar on the Mac or Control spacebar, click to zoom in, Option spacebar or Alt spacebar, click to zoom out. Okay, and that allows you to specify exactly which portion of the image you want to zoom into. For example, I'm Command spacebar clicking on the feet to zoom well into those feet, or Option spacebar clicking on the feet to zoom out from the feet and keep them at the center of my zoomed window. You can also, this is pretty cool, if you want to zoom in pretty radically in one fell swoop, you can, with Control and spacebar down, or Command and spacebar here on the Mac, you can drag around the detail that you want to zoom, like this plus sign up toward the top of the screen, and then I will zoom in exactly on that detail. Other ways to zoom, just so you know, are to double-click on the zoom tool, which will take you out to exactly the 100% zoom size, or double-click on the hand tool, which takes you out to the fit in window size, whatever that happens to be. For me, in this case, it happens to be 8.67%. All right, let's zoom in on a detail of this image here. I'll just Command spacebar drag around the queen here. And you can tell this is pretty simple to figure out. This is K plus queen minus QU. That's keen, just to give you a sense of how to solve this puzzle in case you get it in your head that you want to do such a thing. All right, I'm just going to zoom in just a little farther. 50%, that's good, because now at this point, we have to learn how to scroll. different ways to scroll and or pan inside of an image. You can scroll from the keyboard by pressing, for example, the page up key to go up a screen, or the page down key to go down a screen. For smaller increments, try out Shift with page up or Shift page down, just to nudge the screen. If you want to go back and forth, left or right, Command page up goes over to the left, Command page down goes to the right. And that would be Control page up on the PC or Control page down to go to the right. And of course, you also have Command Shift for little increments, either direction, if you want to do that. But the best way to work is just to use the hand tool, which happens to be selected for me right now. I'll just go ahead and drag with the hand tool, and that just moves the image inside the image window. Really, really great way to work. Such a great way to work, in fact, that you never need to use the hand tool. You never need to actually switch tools to the hand tool. I'm going to go back to the default tool, the marquee tool here, and let me show you. To get to the hand tool at any point in time, press and hold the space bar and then drag. So space bar, as long as the space bar is down, it gets you the hand tool. Then you can drag the image around like so. As soon as you release the space bar, you go back to whichever tool you already had selected. And the reason that these keyboard shortcuts are so great that allow you to select different tools on the fly is that you can keep using whatever tool you have active. As you get more and more experience with Photoshop, you'll find out that it's really a pain in the neck to keep switching back to the toolbox and then do something, and then go back to the toolbox and then do something. It's really great to get to the common tools like the zoom tool and the hand tool just from the keyboard. So remember, spacebar for the hand tool, Command spacebar or Control spacebar to zoom in, Option spacebar or Alt spacebar to zoom out. All right, so now everything that we've seen so far has been working the way it works now inside Photoshop for as long as I can remember. Probably not since the beginning of time, but for several years anyway. Well, this next thing I'm about to show you is new to Photoshop CS2. Photoshop CS2 introduces new support for the scroll wheel. If your mouse offers a scroll wheel, which most PC mice do, certainly all Microsoft mice, Apple has this thing against any buttons or any sort of stuff on the mouse whatsoever. So if you still have your Apple mouse and you haven't thrown that away yet on the Macintosh side, then you don't have a scroll wheel. But if you buy a third-party mouse, then you probably do. And watch what happens. If I scroll up with the scroll wheel, I zoom in incrementally. If I move the scroll wheel down or toward me, then I zoom out. If I press the Option key while moving the scroll wheel up, I scroll up. If I press the Option key, or the Alt key on the PC, by the way, when scrolling the mouse wheel down, I scroll down. And that gives you a sense of what's going on. I don't want to overwhelm you with every single permutation. Mess around with the other keys as well. If you press Shift, you get different results. If you press Command or Control, you get different results as well. So if you like the scroll wheel, go ahead and give it a try. Newly supported inside Photoshop CS2. All right, now that we know how to get around inside Photoshop, let's take a closer look at the lay of the land. Exactly what is it that we're getting around in the first place? To that end, we're going to sort of examine the composition of a digital image, of a file inside Photoshop. What I want you to do is I want you to open up, either using the Open command or Browse in Bridge, whatever, an image called picturepuzzlelow.jpg. It's a close cousin to this image that we already have open. It's actually a low-resolution version of the same image. And I'm going to open it using Open Recent. This command keeps track of the most recently opened images inside Photoshop. So I've already opened this one. I'll just bring it to front by choosing picturepuzzlelow.jpg. And there it is. Now note that this image fits inside the window. We can see everything inside this image, and yet we're looking at it at 100%. So we're seeing all the pixels. This is a very low-res version of the image. It only contains a fraction of the pixels in the high-resolution image we were looking at before. And just to demonstrate that, I'm going to zoom in on it by Command spacebar clicking on the Queen here several times, Control spacebar clicking on the PC. And notice as I click, instead of seeing more and more detail, I'm seeing bigger and bigger squares. And each one of these squares is a pixel. So an image, a digital image, is actually a mosaic of colored squares. That's all it is, just tons and tons of squares. To figure out how many tons we're talking about, here's what I want you to do. Go down to the bottom left-hand corner of the image window. Whether you're working on the Mac or the PC, that's where I want you to go. It may say something like open. It may say something different. It may say doc, colon, some numbers. What I want you to do is press the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on the PC and click this area. And what happens is you'll see the number of pixels inside the image. That's 702 pixels wide by 475 pixels tall. That's a total of about 333,000 pixels. And that may sound like a lot, and that certainly is a lot in French fries, but in pixels, it's not very much. So while pixels may be the core building block of an image, they're not necessarily the kind of things you want to see. Like when you see a human being, you don't necessarily want to see their molecules. You know what I mean? So what do we do if we want to make this image look a lot smoother? How do we go about adding pixels to an image? Well, to do that, go up to the Image menu and choose the Image Size command. The Image Size command is the primary means by which you scale an image inside of Photoshop. In fact, if I had to choose the most important command, barring like the Open command and the Save command and maybe even Print, it would be the Image Size command. It's a very core central command inside the software. And now, inside Photoshop CS2, it has a keyboard shortcut as well, Command-Option-I or Control-Alt-I on the PC. And this is a keyboard shortcut that I've actually been lobbying for over time. Nobody's been hearing me for years and years now. Then suddenly they said, oh yeah, okay, yeah, we'll do that. So anyway, it happened. I don't know why, but suddenly I got somebody's ear and it finally happened. So we now have a keyboard shortcut for image size. I feel very proud, I must say, even though I had nothing to do with it except for bugging people. Once you choose this command, you'll see not only the width and height of the command in terms of pixels, but also the width and height of the command in terms of physical dimensions, printed dimensions, in this case, inches. So we can see that the width and height are 702 and 475 pixels, respectively. We can see that that means that the image in memory, completely uncompressed in memory, every single pixel accounted for, is 325K, so not very big. You can create Word files that are 300K if you work hard enough. That's not so big, where in fact images can get just hellacious size-wise. Now down here in the document size area, that tells you how big the image will print. And this particular image is going to print at 7 inches by 4.75 inches high. It's almost enough to fill up an 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper. It's a little smaller than that. Thing is, even though it's a pretty big image, it's only 100 pixels per inch. Now that's 100 pixels per horizontal inch and 100 pixels per vertical inch. That turns out to mean 10,000 pixels per square inch. Seems like a lot of pixels, but it turns out not to be a very high concentration of pixels. You need more pixels than that to create smooth line art when you're printing an image. To create a smooth, continuous tone image, photograph, that is to say, you want to have about 267 pixels per inch or better. That turns out to be the commercial standard. So 267 pixels per inch. You might often hear people talk about 300 pixels per inch. That's good. Those are good resolutions for photographic images. For line art, you want to go much higher than that. You want to start at about 600 pixels per inch and go up from there. So I'm just going to go ahead and change this value to 600. And I have resample image turned on, which means it's going to go ahead and grow this image. It's going to go ahead and add pixels to the image. I'm going to constrain the proportions. That means it's going to maintain the height and the width of the image so it doesn't end up stretching or squishing the image. And scale styles goes ahead and scales any layer styles that we might have in this image. This doesn't have any. We'll learn about layer styles later. All right, when I increase the resolution to 600 pixels per inch, the document size remains the same. So it's still going to print at the same size. But notice how my width and height values up here, the pixel dimensions have jumped through the roof. It's now 4,200 pixels by 2,800 pixels. It's 36 times as many pixels as we had in the past. It jumps from 325K to 11.4 megabytes. So it's a much bigger image. Now the question at this point becomes, how is Photoshop going to generate those new pixels? And the way you answer that question is to go down here to this pop-up menu that says by cubic, and you can choose one of these other options, and they just have the most ridiculous names. There's no way in heck you would know what in the world's going on with this. I'll just very briefly explain what's happening. Nearest neighbor just makes the pixels bigger, just makes these squares into bigger squares. So that's not what we want. We're not going to get any smooth transitions. It's going to look bad. Bilinear does sort of a bad job of sort of averaging the pixels. Bicubic does a better job of averaging the pixels. So really, you never want to use bilinear. You might want to use bicubic. Bicubic's a pretty good setting, actually. Bicubic smoother is supposedly better for upsampling, that is, adding pixels to an image. And bicubic sharper is supposedly better for downsampling, that is, removing pixels from an image. But it's better to say that bicubic smoother defeats noise inside of an image. If you have a lot of random noise, a lot of randomly colored pixels inside of an image, that's what noise means, then bicubic smoother will help to smooth away that noise. Bicubic sharper is better if you want to sharpen the detail in the image. There's not much noise to work with, and you want to get the sharpest results possible. And in that case, that's what we want. We don't have any noise in this image. It looks very smooth, very sharp, looks really good. So let's keep that sharpness to the best of our ability. So the best way to do that is bicubic sharper. This is the best upsampling technique that there is, the best way to add pixels to an image. So even though conventional wisdom is that bicubic smoother is better for upsampling, we're going to choose bicubic sharper because it's better for upsampling when you have a super smooth image to work with in the first place. So once you've done that, once you set all these settings, the way I have them here, basically resolution of 600%, make sure all the checkboxes are on, make sure this is set to bicubic sharper, then I want you to click OK. And all of a sudden, my screen just turns white on me. This may or may not be what you see. You may see parts of an image, or you may just see whiteness like I'm seeing. But I am seeing that I'm looking at the image at the 1200% view size. That means every pixel is taking up 12 pixels wide and 12 pixels tall, so a total of 144 pixels on screen. Well, that's way too big, so I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to double-click on the zoom tool icon in the toolbox to zoom out to the 100% zoom ratio, and now I am seeing a 1-to-1 screen ratio. And I'm going to press the M key to switch to my marquee tool. You can select all of the tools inside Photoshop from the keyboard if you want. And then I'm going to spacebar drag over a little bit until we get to the queen. There she is. Now we are seeing the queen at the 100% zoom ratio. We're seeing the real pixels inside the image. Question is, does she look smoother than she looked before? The answer is yeah, I guess so. I mean, she looks sort of gummy is what she really looks. But I suppose she looks smoother. We're not having the really harsh transitions between squares. The pixels don't look like just big, exaggerated squares. Looks okay. However, there's no substitute for real pixels. That is to say, Photoshop can upsample an image. It can add pixels to an image, but it's ultimately just averaging the pixels that are already there. It cannot generate new detail. So this eye still looks kind of gummy, kind of okie dokie. It's never going to look better. It's never going to look sharper than it started out in the first place. If you really want super sharp, wonderful, excellent detail, you need to scan that detail in the first place. Either shoot that detail or scan that detail in the first place. So let's go back to Picture Puzzle High, and let's check out the queen inside this image. Notice already, just at the 50% zoom ratio, she already looks much better. And if I zoom in all the way, she looks extremely smooth. We have good detail to work with. These lines down here underneath her chin are obviously independent lines as compared with this image right here, where they're just sort of these gummy, weird, like kind of dots connected to each other. So bad detail, the best Photoshop could do with what you gave it. Low resolution image in the first place, garbage in, garbage out. Basically one of those things. Whereas if you start with wonderful information in the first place, you get wonderful information out. So the trick is scan at high resolution. Scan at a higher resolution than you need, and then downsample inside Photoshop to the size you really want to work. Now, that doesn't really necessarily make sense. You might think, well, if you're wanting to add detail to an image, you'd want to upsample the image, you'd want to add pixels. But it turns out, when working inside Photoshop, when scaling an image, you most likely are going to want to delete pixels from an image. You're going to want to capture as many pixels as you can in the first place, open those up inside Photoshop, and then reduce the pixels down to the number of pixels you actually need. All right, so how do we go about downsampling this image, reducing the number of pixels? Well, of course, we're going to choose that same command. I'm going to go up to the image menu, choose the image size command, or take advantage of the keyboard shortcut. And notice this image measures a whopping 8,422 pixels by 5,700 pixels tall. That's a total of 48 million pixels inside this image. Now we're talking. Most digital cameras can't get anywhere near that. Right now, a typical pretty high-end camera is anywhere from, I'd say, 6 to 12 megapixels. We're talking 48 megapixels. This is enormous, all right? And it still is giving us the same 7 inches wide by 4.75 inches tall. But this time the resolution is 1,200 pixels per inch, just per linear inch. It defies imagination how many pixels are getting packed in here. Now, 2 things we can do at this point to reduce the size of the image. One thing is we could just reduce the print size. Okay, let me show you how that works. If you turn off the resample image checkbox, what that means is no matter what options you change down here, notice the pixel dimensions, they're now fixed in place. Those are no longer editable options. They're now fixed values, so they stay the same. Any changes you make to these values right here are only going to affect the printed size of the image. We're not going to change the number of pixels at all. So if I decide to change the resolution to 600, let's say, then the size of the printed image is going to grow. So we reduce the resolution, the printed size grows. We increase the resolution, the printed size shrinks. And now the image is going to be a whopping 14 inches wide by 9.5 inches tall. If we want to reduce the size of the image, let's say I want it to be only, let's say, 4 inches wide. That makes the resolution of the image 2,100 pixels per inch, actually a little more. So that's just changing the printed size of the image. I'm going to go ahead and reset the values inside this dialog box by pressing the Option key or the Alt key on the PC and clicking on what used to be the Cancel button. When Option or Alt is down, it changes to the Reset button. So go ahead and click it with Option or Alt down. It restores our previous values. What if we want to actually jettison some of these pixels? Because printing an image at 2,100 pixels per inch is ridiculous. That's nuts. That is just requiring your printer to do too much work. You're requiring Photoshop to do too much work. You're just wasting a lot of time. They say that you shouldn't really go beyond 300 pixels per inch for photographic images. With line art images, you probably don't want to go much beyond 600 to 1,200. Someplace in there is where you want the resolution to be. So anything beyond that is completely wasted. Well, let's say in our case, we want to keep the resolution at 1,200, fine, but I want to turn this into a piece of spot art that's about 4 inches wide. So I reduce the width value to 4 inches. The height value also goes down to 2.7 in kind because constrained proportions is turned on, but the number of pixels inside the image really drops. And also, the size of the image in memory really drops from 46 megs down to about 15 megs, más o menos. All right, now I'm going to click OK in order to accept this modification. So now I'm about to lose pixels inside the image. If you want to adjust the way in which you're going to lose pixels, you change this value right here. For example, you might change it to bicubic sharper to keep nice sharp edges. But in this case, I don't really want to. I'm just going to say bicubic. We're just going to let it get a little soft. Certainly, we wouldn't want bicubic smoother. That'll make it overly smooth. We'll lose some detail if we do that. Bicubic is probably the best for this specific image. Now I'm going to click OK to accept that modification. And let's go find the queen. I believe she's over this way. Actually, I want to show you a little trick. I'm zoomed into this image, right? I'm having problems figuring out where I am. That's when the navigator palette comes in really handy. You may recall that I put the navigator palette in the docking well in the previous lesson, so I can just click, or I could just drag the navigator out just so that we can see what's going on here a little better. If you put it elsewhere, you can go to the window menu and you can choose the navigator command. All the palettes are listed in alphabetical order in the window menu, just so you know. All right, I'll go back to the navigator palette. One of the really interesting things about the navigator palette is it's really just this little itty-bitty, teeny-weeny version of your image, just this little preview of your image. And you can scale it by dragging back and forth on the slider if you want to, or clicking these mountain ranges here. I'm just going to scale the size of the palette by dragging the lower right corner of the palette, this little size box, as it's called, in order to see the image a little better so I can make out where the queen is. Well, there she is. And to go to the queen, all I have to do inside the navigator is click on her, and that will take me right to that part of the image. So even though I'm really zoomed in, I can just click on different details, like click on a cab to go to the cab, click on the mob. These guys, these faces here, they represent mob, to go to the mob. Click on this little mission. This is one of the harder things to figure out inside this little puzzle. That's a mission, just in case you're wanting to do this. Sort of a giveaway, but there you go. All right, so let's go back to the queen just by clicking on her in order to center that portion of the image on screen. All right, so much for the navigator. I'm going to put it back in the well. And there she is. All right, so back to our original story. Here's the queen after the downsampling, and she still looks great. She looks very, very smooth. She looks as good as she did before on screen. So by downsampling this image, we really haven't lost anything. So that's one of the big sort of curiosities about working inside of Photoshop. Adding pixels from inside Photoshop really doesn't work. You rarely want to upsample an image inside Photoshop, whereas jettisoning pixels, throwing away pixels in order to get fewer pixels, but pixels that are better expressed, a nice, sharp image, more efficient image, less pixels involved, tends to work out pretty well. And you want to just get a feel for it just through experimentation and through experience. That's how you'll gain a sense of how many pixels you need and what works best. Now, you might say at this point, okay, I understand vaguely how this stuff works with line art, but what about with a photographic image? Well, I've also provided some photographic images for you to play around with inside that same Lesson 4 folder. Namely, there's this image called Snow on Branch, and it comes in both a high-resolution version, so Snow on Branch High, and Snow on Branch Low.jpg. And this is a 12-megapixel photographic image, and so that means we can really zoom in on it to see more and more detail inside this image. So we can really get in on these individual snow crystals inside this image. Compare that to the low-resolution version of the image. This is that same set of snow crystals right there. You know, no matter what we do in terms of upsampling this image, we are just not going to get anywhere. So the moral of the story is, shoot your images. In this case, this is done with a digital camera. The line art was done with a scanner. The photographic image was shot with a digital camera. Shoot your images with a digital camera when you're shooting your photographs at the maximum resolution your camera provides without fail. Never, ever, ever, ever shoot at a lower resolution. I don't care where you're going with that image. Doesn't matter. Shoot at the maximum resolution because you'd rather get this every time. Always better to work from too many pixels than from too few. All right, now let's move on to our final navigation techniques, which are how you go about changing the interface, how you go about modifying the interface to better see your image. And there's a few things you can take advantage of. For example, you can hide, in order to open up some screen real estate so you can see more of your image, you can hide the toolbox and palettes. And you do that by pressing the Tab key. So just press the Tab key. It gets rid of the toolbox here on the left-hand side, the options bar along the top, and all those palettes along the right-hand side or wherever they may be floating. Don't worry that they've all gone away. All you have to do to bring them back is hit that very same key again, press the Tab key, and they all come back into view. So that's Tab to make them go away, Tab to make them come back. If you just want to affect the palettes without affecting the option bar along the top or the toolbox along the left-hand side, press Shift-Tab. Shift-Tab makes those palettes go away. That opens up a lot of room, so you can drag this image window over, see more of the image. Shift-Tab brings the palettes back on screen. You also have options for filling the screen with the image. Notice at the bottom of the toolbox here, there's these three icons, not all the way at the bottom. This takes the image and opens it up inside Image Ready. It's one of my least favorite options inside the program, so ignore that. But these options down here, these little three icons, this first one shows the image inside of a standard image window. This second one fills the screen with the image. See that? Notice that there? I am now filling every single nook and cranny of the screen. And if I drag the image over by pressing the space bar and dragging it, eventually I'll come to the edge of the image, as I do here, the left-hand edge of the image, and then I just see gray. All this empty area out here just appears gray. So this is just sort of this netherland of no image, which can be helpful to sort of see this gray area when trying to evaluate the image, when trying to select all the way to the edge of the image, and a few other things that we'll see later. Now, if you want to make everything go away, including the menu bar at the top of the screen, you click this final fill screen icon right here, and what used to be gray turns black. Turns out you can do every single one of these things from the keyboard as well, and you can do that just by pressing the F key, F for fill screen mode, and it cycles between the three screen modes here. F goes back to a window view, the image inside of a window. F again goes back to this version of the image where it's against a gray background with a menu bar still on screen. And F a third time shows the image against a black background with no menu bar at the top of the screen. If you only now want to look at the image, press the Tab key to get rid of all those palettes. And now I'm going to center this image on screen. And so FF twice in a row and then Tab fills the screen with your image and makes the palettes go away so you can focus in on your image, show it off to a client, show it off to a loved one, whatever. Just enjoy the unadulterated beauty of the image without Photoshop interfering one whit. And then, of course, to come back to where we were before, press the Tab key to bring back the tools, press the F key in order to switch back to the image window. One other thing I want to show you, if you want to switch between open image windows inside of Photoshop, press Control-Tab. Control-Tab, and that's either on the Mac or the PC, you use the Control key plus the Tab key, will cycle between each and every open image. All right, so there we have it, resolution and navigation inside Photoshop CS2. By golly, this is the most the Queen has had to do with navigation since Isabella sent Columbus to America. And we all know the resolution of that story.